All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Solana 2222 and beyond. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Meta Collective DAO, building university-like educational experiences in the metaverse, starting with their first experience in Sandbox, right next to Bored Ape Yacht Club. If you're interested in learning more, join their Discord group and start contributing. I'm your host, Luke Kerner with Blockchain Co-Investors, and we're a crypto fund-to-fund. And invested in 30 of the leading crypto VCs around the world. And we also IPO'd a crypto SPAC on November 9th. And interestingly, on November 9th, I was in Lisbon for Breakpoint, the first conference organized by the Solana Foundation, which brought together, leading builders and innovators in the Solana ecosystem. And I went there to see the community because Solana is the fastest growing human endeavor in terms of market cap in human history. It took Apple 30 years to hit 100 billion in market cap. Solana passed 100 billion in market cap in just 2.5 years from inception. So it seemed a good idea to go to Lisbon and understand Solana a little bit better. And it was time very well spent. And so the genesis for this call is simply to learn more about Solana from some of the thought leaders in the space. And we've got 3 great thought leaders with us today, including Kyle Samani with Multicoin, Mike Malone with Bloomberg, and tech evangelist Joe McCann. And each of our guests are going to talk for about 5 to 7 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. So if you have a question, ask it in the Q&A box on Zoom. And if we pick your question, we'll let you know via chat. And when it's your turn, we'll bring you up on stage, open up your audio and video, and you'll just be another panelist and be able to answer the question. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Joe McCann. Who'll start the comments. Hey, Joe.
Hey, Lou, thanks a lot.
Really, and where are you today?
I am in my home office in Portland, Oregon.
Cool.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to talk a little bit about how I'm viewing certainly the next year, if not much longer, for Solana, and I appreciate you putting this together. I don't want to say it's overdue, but I'm glad we're actually doing it. So let me go ahead and start to share my screen really quick. Looks like I have to quit and reopen. I'll be right back because of the preferences on my machine. Be right back.
Nothing's easy.
No.
Hello. Y'all hear me?
Hey, Kyle, there you go. So
here.
welcome. We just started the call. Joe was going to start off first, and then you can follow Joe, and we're going to finish with Mike. Joe had to shut his computer to get access to his deck. So welcome. Where are you calling in from?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Kyle. I'm one of the co-founders of Multicoin Capital, and I am at home in Austin, Texas right now.
Okay, cool. Cool. And Mike, where are you calling in from? And you're still on mute, Mike.
So now I'm on mute. I'm in the Bloomberg Miami office, and Kyle, I think you're out of place in this. It looks like it's just a bunch of bald guys. You know, a guy with hair.
I feel very fortunate. I got some good genes from my parents, but hey, y'all are looking pretty sharp yourselves. Don't sell yourself short.
Okay, thanks for that, Mike. And rock and roll.
You guys see my screen?
Yeah.
All right. So I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll try to breeze through some of this and kind of give my views on how I'm viewing the Solana ecosystem in 2022 and potentially beyond. There's, as I'm thinking about the kind of the myriad opportunity that exists in Solana, and I would say Web3 more broadly, there's a lot that could be potentially covered. So I try to think about Solana in the kind of immediate to intermediate term in 2 major kind of themes, if you will. The first one being composability, which Kyle has done an excellent job of I think, outlining in a talk he gave at the Multicoin Summit last month. And then the other side of that being culture. And I'll touch on what both of these mean in more detail in a second. But these 2 aspects in a lot of cases could not be further from each other on balance, looking at the two together, where composability has a lot to do with software development and product development, whereas culture is exactly what you think it is. Has very little to do with software development and product development. So first, let's talk a little bit about composability. Again, I do recommend going and checking out Kyle's video. It's very, very good and gives a lot. Will give a lot more detail than what I can give in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, it was great. I totally agree, Joe. Kyle gave a great talk.
It was really good. So I won't, I won't belabor the point here, but I think in short, this is kind of how I view it, is that one of the things that Solana really unlocks, and we've seen this in a pretty short amount of time with developer activity over the past, call it even just 6 months, 12 months plus, is that it's providing us the ability to build really truly immersive and rich internet and web applications. And we can see further applications beyond what we know today on something like Solana. It also enables apps to be building on other apps / protocols. So one of the most critical, I guess you could call it, apps on Solana is in fact Serum, which I would actually argue is critical infrastructure for broader Solana applications. It's a central limit order book that's all on chain, and myriad applications rely on it today. It is a pure example of composability, but that's been the case, kind of call it, for the past 12 plus months. I think there are additional opportunities for protocols like Psi options that will start to become critical infrastructure, and other applications will be building on top of it. Again, this is that kind of Lego brick analogy that you probably heard around composability, but I see a lot of this type of stuff accelerating in 2022. I'm personally biased on, bullish, I should say, on the DeFi options space. So I do think Psi options has a good chance, and maybe Zeta Markets and other folks that are playing in the space. And then finally, with respect to composability, one of the things that Solana is unlocking, in my opinion, is bringing a lot of the Web 2 related features and functionality that users are so accustomed to experiencing to Web 3. And I'll give you one example. There's a company that I've been close with the founder for the past few months now that's more or less trying to build Twilio for Web 3, and they're using Solana to do this. And so at first you may be thinking, well, that's not even like a financial application. That's kind of like over-the-top messaging, SMS style infrastructure. And that's correct. And I think the point here is that today, you don't really have an opportunity to get push notifications in a decentralized way for all the inherent reasons that we're probably aware of for your mobile applications. That is a Web 2 feature that is just table stakes at this point for mobile apps. We just don't have that yet in Web 3. And so I think, a company like Dialect is a kind of canonical example of the types of Web 3 infrastructure that we can bring to actually build that, bridge that feature set from Web 2 over into Web 3. That brings me to culture, which I think is one of the more interesting parts of what's happening with Solana in general. Tom, what's his name? Tom Tongues at Redpoint recently blogged about trying to value tokens and the power of internet culture behind them. It's very difficult to describe internet culture. It's kind of like pornography. You don't know how to describe it, you know it when you see it. It's that sort of a concept, but it's incredibly important for Web3 and crypto in general to have a strong internet culture and kind of social gathering behind it. So what we've seen, at least with respect to Solana, is we're not seeing folks actually come to Solana just in the purely academic or engineering kind of geek approach, which has been kind of the case for most smart contract platforms, or call it broader Web3 L1s and L2s. That is fundamentally changing by Solana's approach with culture. And so how is that actually happening? Well, first, you've seen things like FTX, who obviously is not Solana, but they're big investors in Serum and Solana related ecosystem. They've been actually bridging the culture gap through sports entertainment. And I don't think a lot of folks understand the gravity of that situation and how big that can be as a tailwind for additional users onto the Solana ecosystem. Secondarily, with Solana's kind of explosion in the NFT space, this is actually unlocking a lot more of the creatives or creative cultural folks to bring their art and creativity into the Web3 ecosystem as well. And they're using Solana as a means to do that. And why is that the case? Well, because Solana is super cheap and fast to use, right? There's a second order effect to this where going forward, we're actually going to see brands, and I can assure you, every brand is thinking about and briefing their creative and ad agencies right now on what their NFT strategy is. They're going to be gravitating towards stuff that's the lowest cost for these cultural activations. They need to be a part of internet culture. We saw that over the past decades with the adoption of GIFs and memes, with standard brands nowadays using GIFs and memes seems table stakes. That is the direction that we'll be seeing with NFTs, and Solana is the obvious solution there. Why? It's a relatively fixed cost model. If you're a brand and you're looking to actually get into the NFT space, you can't be intellectually honest with yourself and try to put a budget together when you have a variable cost like what you're going to have on something like Ethereum. And I won't go into waxing poetic as to why, Ethereum may get to their ETH2 scaling and it may get cheaper. That's not the point. As it stands today, they can't actually do that. And brands need to be a part of this culture. And I think you're going to actually see Solana benefit from that pretty seriously. So really quick, and I'm running out of time. I'll be quick on these. There's 5 key themes that I'm looking for in 2022 from an investment standpoint that kind of spill out of composability and culture. I'll go over them quickly now. The first one, no surprise, NFTs. I think we're going to see continued growth on the consumer side. In addition to that, there's B2B opportunities. There are companies that I'm invested in and I'm aware of that are working directly with supporting brands and other businesses to get in the NFT space. But in addition to that, we're going to see continued financialization of NFTs. And we see this today with some folks trying out fractionalization and lending. And even with the Genesis Go IDO yesterday, you can now stake your NFT to earn tokens for the actual underlying project. So I think this is going to continue to accelerate. The second is what I would consider DeFi 2.0. It's probably a butchered term at this point, but more or less the next iteration of what we're going to see with respect to DeFi, certainly on Solana. Will encapsulate things like structured products, credit markets, recursive lending opportunities, and then even things like liquidation bots and protocol infrastructure more broadly. Third, Web3 infrastructure. No surprise here, we can't have all of the applications getting built without additional investments in things like validators and RPC pools. There's a ton of activity that's happening in the dev tooling space. And then another area that I think will be pretty important to Solana more broadly is the message passing capabilities of bridging that is out there. Fourth, DAOs. This is another incredibly big space. The opportunity set is absolutely massive. I do think we will start to see a lot more standardization on best practices around tooling and infrastructure. Treasury management is an area that I'm also very much looking into for Solana-based DAOs. And this concept of activist investors, which isn't really, I would say, necessarily a feature, if you will, of DAOs today, we may start to see a lot more of this actually surface later this year in the Solana ecosystem. And then finally, the last piece from my investment theme that I'm looking into is clearly metaverse and games. Play to earn, there's a number of titles that are going to be coming out or continue development in 2022 on Solana that could be game changers for the space, given the speed and low costs associated with Solana. But more importantly, we can actually start to see the financialization of in-game assets. You can even see something where you're taking an in-game asset and using something like PSI options to actually write an options contract against it, which has really never been done before and may not actually work. But the idea that we can compose these types of applications on Solana is really exciting. And then last but not least, everybody loves sports. We see FTX sponsoring sports. We see Solana being very adept with culture. It only makes sense that there's going to be continued opportunity and growth in the sports betting and prediction market space. So I'll wrap up there, Lou. Thanks for giving me a couple extra minutes. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Joe. That was great. We got to spend a little bit of time in Lisbon hanging out. You want to, what was your experience here? What did you learn? Obviously, I know you spent a lot of time in the ecosystem, but what did you learn from going to Lisbon?
Well,
other than having a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, I mean, I learned that there is an unbelievable desire for people to pitch you ideas. Which is super bullish because, ideas are a dime a dozen, but when they're backed by folks that truly understand the potential for what they can actually build on Solana, and most of these folks that I spoke with have been in, Web3/crypto for quite some time, it's just, they say it's such a refreshing experience to be able to actually build on Solana. So for me, it was just like incredibly bullish to see the developer activity. There were clearly a ton of investors in Lisbon as well, but the developer activity and the kind of the developer, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of the buzz behind what they want to go achieve on Solana was just incredibly inspiring and really awesome to experience.
Wow, super. That's great. Thanks for hanging out for the Q&A, Joe. Appreciate it. And next up, we will hear from Kyle Samani with Multicoin. And I put a link in the chat for everybody if they want to go see Kyle's talk on composability that he gave at the Multicoin Summit a few weeks back.
Hey, everyone, and let me share my screen here. I think this is the one I want to share. All right, can you see my my slides open here?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, cool. I know Joe just talked about composability, and actually, Lou, you mentioned my presentation from a few weeks back. I just wanted to touch on some of those key ideas here. I'm not going to go through the whole presentation, but you know, I really want to focus on what I think is going to be the thing in 2022. And so, you know, in my presentation a few weeks back, I kind of gave this presentation, and it's all about composability. First, I think we need to have a working definition, so I'll start there, which is that a platform is composable if its existing resources can be used as building blocks and programmed into higher order applications. If you think about the internet as a whole, this is largely true of the internet, right? Like the login with Facebook buttons or login with Twitter buttons are an example of composability on Web 2. The fact that you can, you know, connect your Dropbox to some app and have that app store your data on Dropbox is another good example of composability. There's lots of these around the internet. If this then that is like arguably kind of, or is it, or what's one that starts with a Z? Not Zappos. Actually, I forget the name. But those kinds of tools are good examples of composability in the web. Zapper, that's the one. And those kinds of tools are good examples of composability in Web 2. The difference in Web 3 is that, you know, you can have a bunch of different pieces of state in these blockchain systems, but if they're in different systems, it's actually not very easy for them to talk to each other. Historically, bridges have basically not worked at all. They've kind of just started to work recently. Probably the most successful bridge, at least in the last few months, has been, I think it's called AnySwap. And, you know, we're investors in Layer 0 and some others, and we'll kind of see those bridges grow. One theoretical case of the world is bridging becomes completely magical and there's no additional cost, no additional latency, and it's truly magic, in which case you will start to see really, really fluid composability between different blockchain environments.
Hey, Kyle, obviously, you know, one way that you often hear composability described is like Legos. Is that something that works for you as well?
Yeah, and in fact, a couple of slides later, I talk about the fact that, you know, I think over the next 12 months, apps are going to leverage a multitude of composable crypto primitives to deliver experiences that were not possible before. And so my kind of favorite mental picture of that is Legos, where you can build a Lego castle. But I think it's really important to understand the limits of composability, both between chains. There will be some, it's not that going cross-chain breaks 100% of composability. That's definitely not true, but it definitely breaks some types of use cases. And it also increases total cost in terms of signatures and latency and stuff. So I would say, based on my current understanding of bridges, I think you will never rival intra-shard composability. And so I'm optimistic for kind of, I'd say I'm a composability maximalist. And so in that sense, you know, that's what we're really betting on. And I think the really key thing to get into is understanding, well, what can you build with all of that composability? And so in the latter part of my presentation, what I highlight are some examples. My favorite example is probably MarginFi in terms of understanding what it does. MarginFi is a prime brokerage service. And so what that does is, like if you look at what primes do in traditional markets, they do three things. One, they extend you leverage. They're big banks and like JP Morgan and Goldman and Morgan Stanley and those people. So they extend leverage. Two is they cross margin your positions. So if you have long on NASDAQ and short on New York Stock Exchange, those can offset each other in terms of your net positions. And three is they just hook into all the trading venues so that you don't have to hook into all of them yourself. And they're one of the most important kind of service providers in financial markets. It's kind of very natural to use crypto rails to unbundle a prime, where basically you can have all of the plumbing be just a set of protocols that hook into all of the various venues, whether it's Mango or Drift or O1 or Cypher or any of these that are listed here. And then you can just have anyone lend into that pool to provide leverage and provide capital. And I think that's just like a very, very, very cool example of quite literally unbundling what a bank does, or in this case, what the prime function of a bank does. I think it's going to be one of the most important kind of evolutions in market structure as we kind of get towards increasingly efficient markets. And again, like this example of margin fi, right, is if everything cross margins natively, that is literally composability in the kind of the purest sense of the word. And I'm extremely excited to see kind of how all that nets out. So that's kind of what we are looking for the most in 2022. You're just now starting to see applications leverage composability in interesting ways. And I think, by the end of this calendar year, people, even retail folks, they may not necessarily appreciate all of the nuances around composability, but they will at least start to see, hey, this mainstream app I use, whether it's OpenSea or Magic Eden or Mango or whatever, they'll start to understand the importance of that composability as it relates to other like properties and features of the system. That's my overview, Lou. I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, terrific, Kyle. And I'll ask you the same thing I asked Joe. What was your experience like at Breakpoint?
I absolutely loved Breakpoint. The energy was electric. I've been to probably 30 crypto events over the last 3 or 4 years, maybe more, maybe 40. And the energy level at Breakpoint was higher than it was anywhere else. Everyone was excited. Everyone was building. I connected just a ton of teams together, and it was very, very clear that these people all understand that like they're all going to build on top of each other and produce something that is greater than the sum of the parts, and that was just awesome.
Sounds exciting. Great, and thanks too for sticking around for the Q&A. And so we're going to finish up with some comments from Mike Malone, who's probably not as deep in Solana as either one of you guys are, but has a great macro view of crypto. So thanks for joining us, Mike.
Well, thanks for having me, Lou, and I might really appreciate Kyle and Joe's commentary. It's helped me formulate my views on Solana. I've been on the cusp of writing what we call here as a primer on Solana for about a month. I just haven't dug into it as deeply. The key issue I need to point out is Solana has reached number 5 in CoinMarketCap. That's a coveted spot. Last year, number 5 was XRP, 4 and 5 at this time. The year before at this time was Bitcoin Cash. In 2019, it was EOS. You all remember EOS? So it's an outside, and I remember being on conversation with Mike Novogratz, and we did a lot of stuff together, how great EOS was. And so that's why I have to point out is my initial skepticism about, I guess, I don't see Solana as an Ethereum killer, but getting to that level that fast leads me as you all traded markets, a lot of us have learned how to lose money and make money in markets, is you got to be very careful, something that's up 11,000% since the end of 2020. I compare it to Ethereum. It's up over the same period since the end of 2020, up 400%. So that's my key issue I'm looking at with Solana. I have not been able to, and maybe by the end of this discussion we'll be able to solidify my views on. I have not been able to accurately determine what I see happening in the supply schedule and for demand, which I can do in Bitcoin clearly, and I can clearly do in Ethereum, but I haven't been able to define that in Solana. What I sense right now is like in most cryptos, is massive speculation that needs a little purging. I'm not saying I'm bearish, but needs some purging. So this is my outlook. Will be publishing for a broad crypto outlook tomorrow, and I will mention Solana, which is rare for me, Solana. And I point out, if there's, what I see happening is the broad market's fighting the Fed at the moment. All markets are. And they're going to learn a little lesson about fighting the Fed, because once all risk assets keep going higher, the Fed just can be more aggressive. And that's just from a treasury trader from the 80s, who, as you know, Lou, what happens. The Fed will be more likely, and cryptos are the most risky of assets, and the broad market is, as we've seen things like Doge and Shiba, very fully speculative. So expecting a purge, I expect Bitcoin to win, Ethereum to do well, and crypto dollars to continue proliferating, which means demand for Ethereum, NFTs, and potentially Solana. So that's why I'm kind of suspect. I've been looking at the chart for a while, and that jump from 50 to 150 in August SEP to me is very suspicious. I hate to see it go back and start retracing some of that, but that's what markets typically do. You got to kind of test those levels and test the tenacity of the leverage long. So that's my short take on Solana. And the bottom line is, just remember, this time last year, number 5 was XRP, and now I think it's like 8. Litecoin was 4, and it's like 22 on CoinMarketCap. So let's hope Solana can keep that number 5, but history does not play out well for number 5s who jump that fast. With it, I pass it back to you.
Okay, thanks for the comments, Mike. And we're going to be opening up to questions from the audience soon. So again, if you got some questions, you can put it in the Q&A section on Zoom. And if we pick your question, we'll let you know and bring you up on stage. But real quick, before we do that, Joe, Kyle, I don't know if you wanted to comment on anything Mike said, but most notably, he called it an Ethereum killer. And is that how you guys view Solana?
I guess I'll start here. So my own answer is not really. I think they exist. They are certainly competitive, but I don't think they are necessarily 100% directly competitive. For marketing phrasing purposes, people like to present things as binary, which is not helpful. There's degrees of gray. There are assertive use cases where clearly Solana is better. Most notably things like derivatives trading, where you have leverage and you need to have low latency and those kinds of things. But there's a lot of things where Ethereum is doing really well, most notably NFTs. Obviously look at Bored Apes and Punks. Those two assets are the substantial majority of NFT volume. So, give credit where credit is due.
Always appreciated. Thanks, Kyle. Joe, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's one or the other. I think coexistence is probably the longer term approach between Ethereum and Solana. But also, I think if you look at the programming model for building an Ethereum application versus a Solana application, they're just fundamentally different. And with that being said, the types of applications that you can actually build on Solana are also just going to be fundamentally different. And when you have the non-determinism with respect to time and cost baked into the core functionality of transactions on a network like Ethereum, it's just very difficult for developers to build immersive applications. Furthermore, the idea of, say, building some sort of over-the-top messaging infrastructure on Ethereum is fantasy. It just cannot work. And so, in my view, if Solana is going to be a true execution layer for Web3 applications and not just settlement, the price is probably undervalued. That's the way I would look at Solana today.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Joe. And so we've got our first question, Felix. If you want to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you very much. So my question,
where are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from Switzerland, actually. Personally, I'm just I would say, DeFi enthusiast, and I've been following crypto for the last, I would say, 8 years. Haven't really had the conviction to invest in the beginning, but in the recent years, I've really been excited about DeFi and about yield farming and so on. So my question is really about the EVM, the Ethereum virtual machine, because currently there's this huge ecosystem already on Ethereum with developers building their projects. So my question was really related to whether EVM compatibility on Solana as a killer feature, I would argue, kind of what the prospects are there with Neon and other projects trying that, and also what the importance of that is to bring existing developers from other crypto ecosystems into Solana.
I guess I'll take this one. I have very pointed views on this, and my views are very much non-consensus. I believe the EVM is a bug and not a feature. And I believe that in the kind of the strongest possible sense of the word, or of the phrase, I guess. It is true there is a lot of tooling and a lot of protocols that are built around the EVM standard. However, I don't actually think that matters. It would be like, and I think it mattered. You could have argued 12 months ago that it did matter, and that would be more reasonable. I think today it actually doesn't matter at all. And the reason is because like the Solana ecosystem has already redeveloped so much of the same tooling natively in Solana in C level, which is the name of the Solana runtime. And like I have no worries at this point that anything that is in Ethereum now that is not on Solana won't be rebuilt. If you look today, if you look at DeFi stuff, basically everything on ETH lives on Solana, other than like a couple of things like Saffron and Barnbridge, but like almost everything exists. And then if you look at NFTs, again, the core function of basically all NFT stuff is in Metaplex today. Fractional doesn't exist, but like I think the fractional team is building for Solana right now, so that will be live soon. And the other kind of major area of stuff is DAO tooling. Ethereum definitely today has much more robust DAO tooling than Solana. I think in 3 to 5 months, they will be basically feature parity. And so I just don't think it matters. People say like, well, there's this large number of Ethereum developers who don't know Solana, don't you want them to be involved? It's not that I don't want them to be involved, but like the number of people who know Ethereum in the world is extremely small. It's like on the order of like 50,000 or 100,000. There's 25 million developers in the world, and like Rust is like the world's like fastest growing programming language. And so I just don't think it matters. Like people have a tendency to, at the ecosystem level, focus on the wrong things, and like you need to focus on overall developer environment, and Rust and C level, I think are the path forward.
Yeah. In addition to that, full disclosure, I am an investor in Neon Labs. I think it's incredibly ambitious tech and an incredibly smart team behind it. What it will and does ultimately enable is the ability for Solidity Dev to leverage Solana, which is great. But I completely agree with Kyle to the extent that one of the biggest challenges for developers to onboard into Ethereum is you have to learn a new programming model, which is the inputs are tokens and the outputs are transaction IDs, and B, you have to learn a new programming language, which is Solidity. Whereas Rust, according to Stack Overflow developer survey, has been the most loved programming language for the past 6 years. It's been around for quite some time, and it was developed by under the guise of Brendan Eich and other folks within Mozilla. So the tooling and even the care around the language itself is so important and powerful that there's a huge developer ecosystem that already exists around it. The question is how many of those folks actually migrate over to start building Solana applications? I would argue that's probably larger than the folks that are currently writing Solidity that will ultimately be writing Solana applications as well. However, Neon can ultimately be that bridge.
Okay. Thanks for the answers, guys. Felix, did that answer the question?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you very much. Truly appreciate it.
Terrific. Thanks for the question. And we got our next question from Ed, Julene. Ed?
Took a second.
There you go.
Hey, yeah, Ed calling from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a very early adopter. I consider myself a Bitcoin maximalist, but I own no Bitcoin. So gotta unwrap that one a little bit. I really struggle lately with how many times cryptos are compared to companies. And even, Mike, no offense, but when we start talking technical and bond trading and all these traditional financial terms and try to throw them onto crypto. And it's like, well, let's just see how long we can throw that out there without it sticking. But comparing Solana to Apple is just like, wait a minute, what are you doing there? So I struggle with those being said and not being challenged, because it's not comparing apples to even oranges. That being said, one of the phrases we're kind of throwing around here in our Atlanta meetups, and Lou, hit the space bar. I reached out to you a couple times about Crypto Monday Atlanta, but I've never gotten a response. So I got to figure out how to.
Okay, well, you will get a response. I apologize.
How to find you.
We'd love to get it going in Atlanta.
Yeah, but in our meetups, we've really started talking a lot about POH, which is proof of hype, and how important it is to have that proof of hype and how sentiment based these are. So what's got me excited about Solana is the team, is the technology, is the versatility and portability of the protocol. But what I continue to worry about is something that you brought up, Lou, was the what was or was that Mike? I can't remember. But what was number 5 last year? What was number 5 the year before that and the year before that? And that scares the hell out of me, because I've lost money on all those, right? Betamax and Laserdisc were far superior technologies to VHS. Didn't matter. So what would you think are the 1 or 2 things that really need to happen with Solana over the next 6 to 12 months to ensure that it doesn't become Betamax or EOS or the list?
So I can take a stab at this. So for the past probably 15 plus years or so, my investment philosophy around tech has been pretty straightforward, and that is to follow developers. So if you look at what happened with cloud computing in 2007-8 timeframe, you had consensus basically saying, I'm never going to lease servers from a bookstore. Yet developers were building on AWS, and look what happened. In 2010, 11 timeframe, you had an open source project called Node.js, which enabled you to run JavaScript on the server. You had people telling me and everyone else they're never going to run JavaScript. No enterprises will do that. Today, 100% of the Global 2000 runs Node.js. The developers were adopting these technologies at an unbelievable breakneck pace, and that is pretty consistent with what we're seeing with Solana today. So for me, in order for me to get really bearish, I'd have to see a pretty severe downtick in developer activity and developer interest. And that's not measured necessarily by GitHub stars and the number of forks of repos on GitHub. In my view, it's actually measured by the velocity of developers building developer tools for developers. And so, for example, in Solana right now, you had this guy named Armani create the Anchor framework, which is a framework that enables developers to build Solana applications in a standardized way. That has been adopted as kind of the standards, more or less, for building Solana apps. That is a major tailwind for additional developers to then build on Solana. So if my kind of hypothesis around following developers actually holds true for Solana, the velocity of these types of tools and frameworks and best practices will only create a flywheel effect for additional developers to be building on Solana, which implies greater demand for Solana longer term.
Thanks, Joe. Kyle?
I'd say the other thing I would add is look, I think looking backwards is actually extremely unhelpful. And actually, I think it's very value destructive. Like, we're in crypto because like we think this stuff will matter for the world, and like, yes, it can go down 30 or 50% in the near term, but like in the long run has done well if you pick not garbage assets. Like Litecoin actually being a good example. Comparing Litecoin to Solana is like what, like Litecoin literally was nothing, like actually was nothing. And Ripple is like borderline fraud, and like SEC is accusing them of all kinds of fraud, and it's certainly debatable. And so I just think it's like extremely unproductive to look backwards. I'd say it's comment number 1. Comment number 2, building on kind of Joe's comments about developer activity. Today you can just like see that the ecosystem is growing on every metric. Accounts, on-chain accounts, phantom users, developer, any GitHub metrics you look at, TVL, payment flows, NFTs created, NFTs traded, market cap of NFTs, every single metric is up and to the right. which by the way was true for Ethereum through 2020 as well. The difference is that Ethereum hit the gas limit basically, and the gas went up, and everyone got really pissed off. The question is like, is Solana going to run into the same problem? And like the answer is no, they're very far away from running into that problem. And so it's like you can be bullish. Is basically I think the right kind of read on this. The flywheel is turning, like the system has achieved escape velocity. It will continue to compound until something stops it from compounding. I think that's kind of the fundamental brain shift you have to make is for going from a default state of it will stop compounding because there was never really any substance anyways, to it has now achieved escape velocity. It will continue to compound unless some meaningful exogenous thing happens that's stops it from compounding. And once you make that kind of fundamental brain flip, then it's extremely easy to be bullish.
And when you talk about compounding, is there any one or two metrics that you really focus on?
Not really. I'm like not a data guy. I don't like prices or even numbers really. But like just all the numbers I just gave, like all of them are up and to the right. And like look, if one of them goes up 50x and the other ones don't move at all, like you should be suspect, right? Like that probably means like something is a little bit off. But like if directionally they're all moving in the same way, like that's obviously very good.
Okay, thanks. Did Mike, did you want to add anything, Mike?
Just one thing, I think the key point I get from Ed's question is he points out to me why the main bias I have, and I think the SEC is going to go for, is that of an index or an ETF that tracks a widely disseminated index of cryptos, maybe the top 12 or so, because an index will have a survivor bias. Now, Solana wasn't even on the radar a year ago. Now it's number 5. Now we've seen that happen. That was my key point. An index will filter that out. The key issue I have with Solana is I have not yet been able to define the supply and demand trajectories. And I can easily do that with Ethereum now. Bitcoin we know is clearly being adopted. Clearly supply is going down. We're burning supply, and it's actually the incremental supply is declining. Boom. Unless demand does declines, then price must go up. It's just about measuring that. With Solana, I have not been able to figure that out, and I do sense massive speculation in Solana at the moment. I see it everywhere. I hear it everywhere. I just think we need to purge a little bit of that before I would go out, and I might want to do a primer on it, but I don't want to go out and come out right out bearish. And so I'm kind of waiting for the right time and getting the right data. So that's why I'm waiting for it. So here, I'll end with this. The key thing I have problem with the Solana is I have not been able to clearly define the supply and demand trajectories. I have to depend on guys who really know the technology, like you guys, to tell me what it is, rather than for me trying to figure it out, which is good. But with Ethereum, I can do that. I can't do that with Solana yet.
Sorry, what do you mean you can't figure out the supply and demand trajectories?
Well, so I can properly analyze it. And for me, everything I do publishes on the terminal for institutional investors. And most institutional investors see something like this and say, yeah, great. Okay, what else hasn't, and they'll see what I just said. Well, last year, what was the fifth? What was the fifth the year before? What was the killer? I would say competitor. You're right. It's not a killer. It's a competitor Ethereum. But they'll look back and say, okay, how do I point out to my board of directors why I should invest partially in this coin? That's the question I always ask myself. And so I have to determine that first. And like I said, I can clearly do that on the terminal for institutional investors, and then it trickles down to events like this, which are awesome. And I haven't been able to yet, like I have to admit, I have to dig in more. And I'm looking for suggestions on how to do that.
Okay, well, we'll get back to you with some of those, Mike. Ed, did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Those are some good insights and some of the reasons that I'm in it pretty heavy. But it's that it's measuring. You don't have earnings. You don't have all these traditional factors, and so the combination of, I think, hype and liquidity, which is I think what Mike's driving towards, is how much is out there, drive the price more than anything else. So,
well, can I ask you a question real quick? You sound like a traditional equity investor. As a commodity guy, oh, you're not? Okay. So how about commodities? Because commodities, there's no earnings either. I mean, I've been saying this about gold for 30 years.
Yeah, but good point. Yeah, it's that's what we're all trying to get our heads around. is what drives this price. I mean, because when you say, oh, comparing it to Apple, it's like Solana is not worth Apple. That's ridiculous to even compare the two. So it scares you, right? Because it feels like it's overhyped. But then when you measure liquidity and you say, well, maybe hype is valuable, slash Tesla, slash Apple, slash GameStop, then where does that take you?
Well, one thing about Apple I really like is point out is, I mean, they're buying back a substantial part of their own percentage of their own shares. Something that Ethereum is doing. I understand Solana is doing a little bit of that, but I just can't define it as and project it out as much as I can for Ethereum.
Right. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Ed. Our next question is going to come from Andy Singleton. Andy? You got it. Unmute. Unmute. You unmute. More time. No, okay, we'll move on to our next question.
Hello,
Oh,
yeah, so how's that? Sorry, my phone keeps interrupting me. Turn off the Bluetooth here. I'm on Kyle's side where I'm a builder and I'm looking at adoption from the building side. And what I am concerned about right now is reliability. Blockchains have different approaches to reliability. For instance, Algorand keeps the chain very clean, allows you to do very limited programming. It's extremely reliable. Solana says you can do everything you want. We're going to give you generous CPU and memory, and that makes it a great programming environment, a great place to build these cross-chain, the brains for these cross-chain financial applications, but it also produces these reliability problems. And we're seeing a lot more of these cross-chain financial applications. You guys referred to that. For instance, Curve supports dollar trading on lots of different chains. People who are trying to do the prime brokerage but use collateral from multiple chains. Those are all applications that could use a sort of a very highly programmable brain. Do you think Solana is appropriate for that right now?
Sure, I guess I'll take a first stab at that. There's never been a single piece of history and software in the world that has ever mattered that does not have growing pains. It is impossible to design bug-free, not even bug-free, stable software that becomes wildly popular on round one. People forget Ethereum had a lot of problems in 2016. People DDoSed the network in September 2016. It was called the Shanghai attacks. And they literally had to hard fork the system and update the gas cost for different types of compute versus storage requirements. I forget the exact details, but you can go look all of them up. Right, and that that was just like a function of just the gas parameters were set wrong and a bunch of other things. They've updated a ton of stuff with 2017. If you looked around ICOs and how transactions propagated through the network, they updated the networking libraries a ton in 2017 after learning about all those things. Like today, I would actually argue Ethereum has a new form of stability problem, which is gas fees. It's not that the chain doesn't work, it's that only 2% of the people who want to use the chain get to use the chain. I don't know, like if 98% of the users can't use the system, is it like functioning or is it not functioning? Or is it 98% broken? Like, you know, so I think it's a little bit unfair to say, oh yeah, like people are DDoSing the system and it slows down, therefore it's like not stable. I mean, like that's true, but also like just zoom out. Yeah, it's just like software has bugs and like people fix the bugs. I would argue the fact that it's being DDoSed is a sign of success and is actually very bullish because people are bothering to DDoS it. If people were not bothering to DDoS it, that would imply irrelevance. But this is actually implying relevance.
Completely agree, 100%. Yeah, I mean, if it didn't matter, no one would be DDoSing it. In addition to that, if you look into the way Turbine is actually designed, I know this probably sounds heretical, but DDoS is somewhat of a feature, albeit there are going to be make some modifications to the 1.9 release to fix this. The reason that I'm less worried about the reliability concerns of Solana is that you still have a number of, the TPS number still is significantly higher than basically any other chain, even when it is getting DDoSed. And the notion that, Anatoly can just restart the system is also just complete FUD on the internet. None of that is actually true. And frankly, this makes it an anti-fragile system. And to Kyle's point, Ethereum had a lot of issues with the Shanghai tax. It's now an incredibly valuable and hugely utilized chain. That means what didn't kill it made it stronger. And so that anti-fragile feature of Ethereum is now coming to something like Solana. So in my view, longer term, this pressure testing of the system is super important. Another view of this is if you look at Web 2, cloud native or distributed systems architectures today, there's a thing called chaos engineering where you actually go and try to destroy the system and blow up servers, this and that. You really can't do that in a lot of these L1 mainnet platforms. It's just not really possible. You more or less have to test a lot of this stuff in production, which is kind of the antithesis to decades of software development and testing and best practices. I would argue that some of the issues that we're facing is actually, again, super healthy for the system long term if you zoom out. In the short term, sure, there are going to be some pain points. But yes, that's the point of mainnet being in beta and actually finding out where these bugs are so that we can resolve them for when we actually hit huge amounts of daily active users that are actually transacting on Solana's chain.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Joe. Andy, answer your question.
Yes, thank you. That was great insight. That Ethereum actually is degraded in different ways, and that every product needs to be pressure tested in order to get on that improvement curve. So thank you.
Makes sense. Thanks, Andy. Our next question is from Mark Smith. Mark, open up your camera. There you go.
Thanks so much, Lou. Great panel. I'm calling from Potomac, Maryland. I wanted just to ask, I have a project that we're looking to sort of port onto a particular, it's already in a blockchain, but looking to port onto crypto. And just wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about the ecosystem of folks that are most active in funding projects, the role of the foundation, just talk about it from a perspective of someone that's looking to get a project moving. And you talked a little bit about, Joe, I think some of the areas that are most active. This is a space it's a sort of agricultural marketplace that we're looking to take into the crypto the world and develop derivatives around it, rather than just sort of a purely financial marketplace. So could you talk a little bit about that, just out to the panelists? Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah.
What's the question? What's the question more directly?
Just in terms of what groups are most active in terms of funding startup projects in the space. What would your recommendation be? Is there foundation or other sort of aspects of core folks that are looking at supporting nascent projects?
Right. So yeah, Joe, he's looking for help in how he can get his project funded, whether it's from a VC, a foundation, or elsewhere.
Got it. Yeah. So I'll kind of take a stab at this in a couple different ways. As a former entrepreneur and founder, candidly, this is the best time ever in the history of fundraising to raise money. I'm not bullshitting you. I've just never seen a better opportunity for capable founders and entrepreneurs to raise money in the space. So one, I would put yourself out there. Two, because there's so much capital available on the venture side, I think one of the things that you should evaluate is who are going to be actually strategic folks around the table when you actually take money. Money is actually not the hard part today. It's actually finding really good partners. There are a number of folks out there. Frankly, the folks at Multicoin are top tier and top notch, in my opinion. You've got folks like Solana Ventures that are directly associated with the Solana broader ecosystem that are also very interested in supporting nascent projects. So I would say that there's myriad ways of going about it. The last thing I'll mention though is if you're wanting to get more of a foundational approach to your product or your vision, one of the things I encourage people to do is actually join a hackathon. And I believe there's a new hackathon on Solana that's coming out in February. The judges for those hackathons, many of them are investors. And so if you do in fact have something that piques their interest, I can assure you they will proactively reach out to you.
Just on top of that, so Multicoin has invested so far about $100 million into Solana-based teams, maybe 120, somewhere between 100 and 120. So we're extremely active in that ecosystem, as are many others now. Yeah, I mean, I think today every serious VC in the space is investing in the Solana ecosystem. I'm not aware of anyone that is not. Even folks that I would say traditionally identified as ETH maxis or borderline ETH maxis are investing in the Solana ecosystem. So there's ample capital available.
Okay, good. Mark, you get your question answered?
Yeah, thanks so much. Just where would I find the information on the hackathon?
The Solana team will tweet about it very loudly. You won't miss it on Twitter. I think Ethereum is also about to announce a hackathon as well.
Okay.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you so much.
Okay, well, just with the, we got a minute left. So real quick, I'll ask one question of all of you. If we're here in a year talking about Solana, what do you think we'll be talking about in a year that we're not talking about today? And Mike, I'll let you start, and you can answer anything outside of Solana as well. In crypto, what are we going to be talking about, or Solana?
We're going to be talking about the market respecting the Fed, not fighting the Fed, because the number one way to stop the Fed from tightening for markets to go down, cryptos are the most speculative assets there are. Solana has been one of the best performers. I suspect it's more going to trickle down on the curve, and Bitcoin and Ethereum and crypto dollars will remain the best performers. And not so much crypto dollars as performers, the proliferation of, which means demand for Ethereum. With that, I pass it back to you.
Okay, thanks. And Joe, what do you think we'll be talking about Solana? We're not talking about today.
I think we'll be talking about Solana's new all-time high.
And Kyle, you get the last word.
I think in a year we're going to be talking about mainstream consumer tech companies using crypto in their core products. Instagram NFTs being probably the most high-profile example. The CEO of Instagram, Adam Mosseri, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, but he's publicly said that Instagram is building NFT stuff. I do think they will launch it this calendar year. And I think when we look back at the end of the year, that will be by far the single most important thing that happens.
Wow, super interesting. Okay, well, thanks a lot, Mike, Joe, Kyle. That was awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.